All right, on. Actually receiving audio this time. Good. Move this up. Brace it. Let's get this on. Anybody watching the video afterwards, just skip the first 10 minutes or so, like usual. Oops, mute myself. First 10 minutes of my attempt to potentially make sure I have enough on the YouTube revenue slot to actually get paid next month. Come on, load. Okay, you got it. Control room. Come on. Come on, you got this. You can do it. There we go. Live chat. Go ahead and get the ever unagreeable tool up. Ourselves over, and I guess just center on the Black Sea, since topic 1 is up here, topic 2 is down here. And while I wait for people to show up, I'm just going to look at some things real quick, see if there were any further updates. Not particularly, except for lithium jumping. Lithium did finally jump back up to, this puts it now at, converting that to dollars, about $42 per kilogram. So still way down from where it was, but it is now in the very, very bottom of the range that that it at least should be in. Josh, but wow, that is not really a lot of people, but that's a lot of people really fast compared to my usual. Welcome to my attempt to hopefully push my YouTube revenue just over the threshold to make sure I actually get paid. Let's see. On what was I about to look at? I was about to look at. Oh yeah, I was just making sure YouTube was lying again. Uh, yep. 2.5 or 3 megabits versus a claimed bit rate of 0. Yep, YouTube is lying as always. All right. Was there anything else I was looking for or at? Oh yeah. I guess while we're still in the waiting period, uh, India is starting to show levels of internal unchecked corruption heading in South Africa and Pakistan's direction, which is not good. One bit of which surfaced in somehow this happened. Where is it? So for those who don't believe me, here were the articles. So a official in, I think that's in Andhra Pradesh, or no, looks like Chhattisgarh state, uh, ordered, and for some reason the people under him obeyed him. They emptied an entire dam reservoir because he dropped his phone in the water. So they let all the water out that's, supposed to be the source of water for the entire surrounding area and all these cities around it, because he wanted to go find his phone. Money's mostly gonna come from super chats because I think each stream usually within 48 hours the video recording gets me about like $5 to $7 depending on how popular the topic was. But that would still adding that onto this month's total would still put me short of actually getting paid in June. And yep, we froze. Come on, unfreeze, unfreeze, unfreeze. You're wearing my patience. Wow, you are really pushing it. Okay, there we go. Oh, and of course we'll end up talking about China and Taiwan again. I'll actually start doing the listing of things you might want to gradually build up a stock of before that all starts up, which includes some important things and some not so important things. Some things have been taken off the complete China dependency list gradually going forward. One of which, most recently, as I just had to get a new one, is actually shower curtains. Previously, they were literally all made in China. Made in China is all you would see. However, when I got this new one, I found a huge swath of them have shifted production down to Vietnam. So that's one more thing throwing itself onto the list of fleeing China. And even Chinese manufacturers who manufacture like products only for the Chinese market actually don't even want to build like their further factories in China anymore. They themselves are actually even like doing their best to try to only build new production facilities elsewhere. Their main choices have so far been Bangladesh and now Kazakhstan. So even Chinese producers in China are kind of aware of what's coming, which, I mean, one would hope since it's pretty dead set obvious. Dang, 11 already. I mean, well, the thing with the phone is like it's gone. Like I'm sure if you like if you took it to like, some high-end uh specialized tech stuff, you could probably still extract stuff off of it, but I mean for if he was like worried about like one of his underlings or like a news agency maybe getting a hold of it and finding incriminating stuff on it, they're not going to be able to because the only thing like they would know how to do is just turn it on. And also, I mean, no one was gonna like know it's his phone unless he literally like signed his name on it. And I don't know, put like one of those raised government seals next to his signed signature on the back of his phone. Let's zoom in a bit further. Turkey. Oh, Turkey. We have lost you now. Erdogan has won the election. For anyone who wasn't aware, if we have this many people already, we're we're going to just go ahead and get started. So, for anyone who wasn't aware, Erdogan has won the elections in Turkey, which has sealed the country's fate. So, he's the main push, the main driver behind their whole neo necro Ottoman Empire restoration thing. So, he's president for another 5 years again, at least. So, that has basically locked it in. There's no more avoiding it at this point. They have, or he has already had them not covertly, since he kind of just outright announced it, but he has already had them pushing into northern Syria. They are creating, he calls it a line, or no, it was not a line, a zone, a zone of safety and a zone of safety and like guaranteed well being or something like that. From around here, a bit north of Aleppo, and just following along like that for like a 20-mile push into the Syrian border here. Except they're not actually stopping like that. They're doing stuff down here too, which was kind of guaranteed. They were basically going to follow this chunk inside of the river, and it's primarily because they want control of the at least the half of the Syrian oil fields that are on this side of the river, which, if they restored them completely, given how much production has been lost to field degradation because they've been offline for over a decade now, they could potentially get them up to maybe 150,000 barrels a day, which is not that much considering Turkey's modern day oil demand levels are around 100, or sorry, are around 1.2 million barrels per day. And within the next 10 years, they're probably going to be around 1.5, maybe even 1.6. But it's something further for them. And they are doing stuff in the Sea of Marmara and in their portion of the Black Sea as well, and pushing into their portions of their plain water and basin between them and Cyprus. And presently, on their own, they have only about 70 to 80,000 barrels a day, but they will probably be able to get up to maybe like over 100 in a few years, but they're not going to be able to really push much farther than that. And so that plus the covertly controlled oil fields in Syria would give them like a total of 250 under their direct supply guarantee, plus their semi puppet buddy Azerbaijan basically sends everything to them that they themselves do not consume. So they, starting up that new fields over these last few months, should be pushing them up to about 700,000 again. They themselves consume about 120. So that's about 580 going over to Turkey, which gives Turkey a total guaranteed supply. That's the whole key aim, is guaranteed supply of about 830, which is, over two-thirds of their demand, and is, around what they usually fall down to whenever they hit a sudden economic hardship. So that's like the basic gist of the idea. And then at least that's the strategic like point, if you want to put like a strategic point in big quotation marks of the northern Syria stuff. The underlying like psychological aim in Erdogan's head is Ottoman Empire restoration, because that's been his whole thing. Not to the same like incoherency grandpa levels that Putin has done with Russian Empire restoration. Erdogan has been like more coherent in the statements that he's made. He hasn't like drifted from one supposed ideology to the other, like in between speeches, like Putin constantly does. But they are both like from the same angle of wanting imperial restoration. And unlike Russia, Turkey is actually briefly going to succeed at it. For about probably 15 years until they inevitably come into conflict with us, and that's when they're going to end up getting hammered. But we're about to go down that whole pathway in a second. Just make sure nothing new, no super chats. Okay, so the playout of this, as I've said in the past, is basically going to be along these lines. So these islands off here, off the coast of Turkey, are Greek. Uh, they belong to Greece, and Greeks live there. Turkey doesn't like that and kind of wants them, and they're not actually going to get them. And Erdogan is well aware of that. He's stupid in the fact that he wants to do this whole imperial restoration thing, but unlike Putin, he's not stupid in terms of actual like strategy and expectation. He will get that way the further it goes along because that's what always happens when you go down this path. But he does know that he's not actually going to get these islands from Greece, but he is using them as the most likely split with NATO points that they're going to have, as he and his fellow like Ottoman Restoration politicians have been making like constant random accusations against Greece over the past few years that claiming that Greece is secretly constantly smuggling rocket launchers and artillery pieces onto the islands because they intend to attack Turkey because reasons. And so they are going to use that eventually. Most likely, this is coming within this decade. They are going just like their conflict with Iran. Uh, Whether or not this comes first or that comes first is actually dependent on Iran and Azerbaijan. So those two, it could go either way, which of these comes first. But this is Turkey's pathway out of NATO because they don't want to just walk away because be kind of that would be kind of iffy internally. However, if they have and internally frame this as a uh, a defensive like action against Greece, and then big evil NATO takes Greece's side against them, because we actually do have Article 9, I think it is, in NATO, that if a war breaks out between NATO members, then whoever the obvious aggressor is the one who NATO will side against. So when big evil NATO sides against them, then Erdogan can have Turkey storm off out of NATO like an angry child leaving a room and slamming the door behind themselves, and look much more. It will look much better internally. But that conflict is coming over these islands, not really over the islands. He just wants out, and also would like to strike and at least eliminate what Greece does have on the islands, just for the sake of it, because Greece does have military forces and equipment there, just not the uh, you know hundreds of MLRS rocket artillery pieces that he claims they do. So they're going to have that conflict, which Greece and Turkey, despite the population and economic disparity between the two, they are actually pretty evenly matched. So they will have a back and forth. Granted, Greece will probably end up losing a bit more just because Turkey has so many effective drones they can throw at stuff. But then when NATO steps in, or even just some members on their own accord on Greece's side against Turkey, Turkey will not actually lose because they will immediately stop and back off. Because, like I said, Erdogan is not Putin, at least in some regards. He's not as stupid. So they will back off from that then. And uh, the actual scale of that will also depend on whether that comes first or whether their conflict with Iran comes first. But one way or another, both of those will be happening. The conflict with Iran, let me check chat like a responsible streamer. Nothing there. Okay. So the conflict with Iran is going to be based around the whole Azerbaijan issue, because, for those unaware, in these northern provinces of Iran, West Azeri, East Azeri, and Ardabil, basically the entire population is Azeri. About 16 million people, most of whom are Azeri. That is more people than actually live in Azerbaijan itself, population about 10 million. And they have constantly like cried out to Azerbaijan that they're being oppressed, and for the sake of truth, they kind of are. Tehran, isn't exactly known as like the best in terms of treatment towards even its own citizens, or the its own Iranian citizens, the ones you would think are like its highest priority. You've seen how it treats them, I'm assuming, in the various times that they have not liked its decisions over recent years. So its treatment of its ethnic minorities, I assure you, is much worse. So they are like kind of oppressed. They're not oppressed. They're not like the Uyghurs in China, but they're not exactly treated well. Just like the Kurds aren't treated well. Just like the Balochs down in the southeast aren't treated well. Uh, so they have constantly cried out to Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan has constantly beefed with Iran over this. They've never directly fought. They have come close to it, and now, uh, whether or not whether or not you believe they're false flags or not is irrelevant, because if they're going to be used to start a war, they'll be used anyways. Like the hotel bombings in or apartment bombings in Russia were used for the Chechnya stuff. Whether or not it's a false flag is irrelevant if it results in the war. But they're starting to claim that Tehran is actually doing stuff to them now. And also, Azerbaijan has been claiming that Iran has been sending fighter jet sorties to like poke in and out of its airspace. And as well, there have been several bombings and attacks at government facilities in Azerbaijan that Azerbaijan claims are being done by terrorist groups that are being funded and trained by Iran to destabilize the regime in Azerbaijan. And also, uh, there was a group that was recently arrested in the government for at least the president in Baku claims they were going to launch a coup against him. Personally, I think that's about as real as the supposed coup that was being launched against Erdogan back in 2016. But it was a decent excuse to get rid of politicians that opposed him. But he claims they were working on behalf of Tehran and were going to overthrow him. So they're really going through the setup for this, and the moment the moment stuff starts with them, they will maybe not immediately, but probably soon enough, they will cry for Turkey's help, and Turkey will come to help them absolutely, as Turkey has quite a bit to gain here. And once Turkey joins, that's it. Iran's done. Iran, in terms of like competency of its military personnel, it's actually pretty fine. It's not the Iraqis or the Afghans or the Russians. The Iranian the Iranians actually, like, despite hating Tehran, the Iranians actually do love Iran itself, and they will fight and are actually like decent. Uh, they they won't just scatter like the Iraqis and the Afghanis did. And unlike the Russians, they're not going to be showing up untrained and drunk into combat. The issue where they're just gonna fall flat on their face is the fact that Iran's military equipment consists of old, like, M60 Patton tanks from, the 50s and 60s, like Korean War stuff and early Vietnam stuff, as well as F-14s and F-4s for in terms of their combat aircraft, which they we do like track how often they like fly sorties around and stuff, and they don't really do it anymore a lot for a reason, because there's an issue with maintenance of the F-14s and F-4s, and that's that no one makes the parts and like mechanical aspects of those aircraft anymore. So all they have is whatever they still have like in stock on hand in warehouses at their air bases. that they have managed to like actually, preserve decently and keep from, rusting after just being there for decades in exposure. So they do not have like a lot going for them. And also like the computer systems inside their missiles and everything, the ones that would be like on the aircraft at least and used for aerial engagements, have a high chance of the it's gold is fine forever, but silver will corrode with time. Not as fast as copper, but it will corrode. So it's been decades, and the chances are that like a lot of the computer systems in a lot of their air launched missiles at least will have probably had enough corrosion to the point that they won't function properly. They do have their own domestically developed air defense, ground based air defense systems. However, they're not all that great, but they're good enough. But whoa, what are you doing? What are you doing? Okay, there we go. But all in all, they really just don't have it in line. And Azerbaijan is it's not really a military power of any real level. Turkey, on the other hand, let me realign this compass. There we go. Turkey is actually in the global top 10. And that's not the generic Wikipedia stamp of approval. That's the actual Maxogear analysis stamp of approval. Turkey actually has troops trained to NATO combat training standards. In terms of combat personnel, like actual infantry, they have around 100 to 120,000. Uh, Iran, for numbers comparison, has somewhere around like I think 250. And in terms of tanks, Turkey has a few hundred more modern tanks. They have several hundred German Leopards, and they also have a few of their own newly developed. I forgot what they're called. Altai tanks, I think, that are kind of, sort of a a rip-off espionage clone. I don't know if they actually did or not, but they're kind of a rip-off look-alike espionage clone of the new South Korean tank, the Black Panther. They don't have a lot of those yet, but they are building them really fast because they also have a lot of older tanks. I think they were primarily relying a lot on Leopard ones, but they're phasing those out, and they're going to be primarily operating on the modern Leopard 2 and their own Altai. In terms of Air Force, they still at the moment have a bit of a hang up. They do have about 200 F 16s, and then their other 200 combat aircraft are F4s that are quote unquote modernized, but that really doesn't mean anything at this point. They wanted F-35s and or modernized F-16s. However, we kind of saw the direction they were going in, and we used the whole them buying arms from Russia thing as an excuse. But the real reason we turned them down with the F-35s and F-16s is because it's become pretty obvious the direction they're heading in the future. So they're not getting any of those. So for the moment, they're just going to have the 200 F-16s, and they might get some additional ones from Egypt, as Egypt is getting into a desperate economic situation, so horribly mishandling so many things. And Egypt has been receiving new Rafales from France. So Egypt might phase out some of its older F-16s and hand those off to Turkey. So Turkey might get up to, I don't know, 300 plus F-16s. They are soon enough going to actually bring out their first domestically produced fighter, and despite their aspirations and hopes, it's not actually going to be a fifth gen fighter, but it's going to be equivalent to about 4.5 G uh, generation. I mean, not G's as in G forces. What they do have, however, is uh, a lot of drones that have proven, especially in Ukraine, quite effective and really not trackable by like lock-on radars. The only times Russia's been able to shoot down some of the Bayraktars that Ukraine got from Turkey was with actual like anti-aircraft guns that they primarily had to visually target with. So they do have, as of the last we knew, about 200 Bayraktars. Turkey does, not Ukraine. Ukraine has minus the ones that were shot down. Ukraine should have about like just over 20. But Turkey has about 200 or so, maybe a few dozen more that, like I said, are you can only really shoot them down with like actual AA guns, visually tracking, which effectively means you're only able to do that during the day, obviously. At night, you would just be having to spray and pray. And because A, they're small, and B, they're basically made of plastic, and plastic does not really show up on radar like metal does. They also have new drones. The Ancili or Ankiri, I forget what the name is, but they are high altitude drones made for like operating at 40 to 50,000 feet, which is outside of most like AA range to begin with. So they're high altitude, longer range drones, so they would be able to actually like strike deep within Iran. Excuse me, move when I tell you to move. And you may have seen recently they also have an actual jet uh, combat UAV on Turkey. Uh, I don't know, jet drone, I guess. That's the only thing I could really. Yeah, there it is. So this it has flown last year. It is actually operable. I don't know what they're showing that for. That's not theirs, but yeah, this is it. And they do. It's not going to really come into play with the Iran stuff, but they do actually have a small, not an aircraft carrier because of how small it is, but a drone carrier at sea for those. But they are beginning to produce these as well, and by the time this happens, they will almost certainly have a few hundred of those at least. So they will have those plus maybe a few dozen of their domestic fighters, plus 300 maybe total F-16s if they offer to economically bail Turkey out or Egypt out by buying those off them as Egypt phases out its older ones with Rafales. I don't know how Egypt's still paying for the Rafales though. Well, they might have made like a lump sum payment years ago for them or something, and they're just still being delivered on contract. And so, uh, yeah, that's all that's going to erupt. And I'd say the better chance is it happening this decade in the remainder of the 2020s. Maybe it might get a little delayed into the early 2030s, but I'd say almost certainly it's happening this one. And the end result is going to be Iran's loss. Whether the UN recognizes it or not uh, is irrelevant in de facto terms. De facto control, the Azeri provinces in northwestern Iran are going to be, transferred or given, quote unquote, to Azerbaijan, which benefits Turkey also as well, because then they have no more border contact with Iran, and they are free to use this area as Azerbaijan is one of the countries that lets them base forces there. So that then furthers their whole reach, Ottoman restoration, and their inevitable surround of northern Iraq, which is where they're inevitably heading once you get further into the future, like the later 2030s or early 2040s. And I actually had a progression of stuff for this, a set of map progression. Excuse me, get the thing off the bottom. So this is the current arrangement of things. You have the US, NATO, the olive green is for non-NATO member allies, like hardcore allies, as in not like loosely kind of allied, but like actually hardcore military allied, in which you have Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia, along with Austria and Sweden, although Sweden's about to be in NATO, and Kuwait, because ever since we rescued them from the Iraq in from Saddam's invasion back in the 90s, Kuwait has been like 100% big heart emoji towards the U.S. So you're going to see the progression of most immediately the Russia stuff, which is going to be Russia's loss. Ukraine, Sweden, and Moldova end up in NATO. And then sometime around that same time frame, as we're probably talking next year or maybe 2025 for the Taiwan thing, Taiwan happens. And as that time progresses, you hit the later 2020s, Russia collapses, uh, reformed Belarus ends up in NATO, Georgia finally ends up in NATO like they wanted to. And in the aftermath of Taiwan, after China's failure, Taiwan ends up with actual like military and in part of the extended actual military alliance along with Vietnam, because Vietnam's pretty much hinted that they want to, but they're waiting for like a final. Hold on, stop, stop. There we go. Sorry, my phone was ringing. Because Vietnam kind of sees where China's headed, and despite the fact that there was never any real historical Chinese imperial claim to northern Vietnam, China makes that claim anyways. They went for it in the 70s, the late 70s or early 80s. So Vietnam is not about that. They're not taking that again. And then, uh, well, and then also you saw Turkey goes white because Turkey leaves. And then we zoom in, and Turkey becomes a center for its ambitions. This is the result of their war with Iran, also shading in their occupations of Cyprus, northern Syria, and now shading in Azerbaijan as their ally. Reformed, collapsed Russia ends up in NATO. And then this is not a guarantee. Okay, this is not a guarantee. This is something that may happen. Uh, After Iran, and this, if the regime has not been like sort of dethroned by the populace itself in like another final uprising, since each uprising they go through since the first ones back in 2009, I think, gets more intense and violent. If it has not been toppled internally already, losing this war will toss it out the window. And in the vacuum, Kurdistan, the Iranian portion first, might decide that this is finally the time, and the northern Iraqi portion of Kurdistan might then also decide that this is finally the time. And again, whether recognized by the UN or not, they might actually become a thing finally for the first time in quite a while. And in terms of would Iraq allow it, it that's completely irrelevant. Iraq wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Like, I mean, we were already, I was already, making, kind of implied jokes about the Iraqi military anyways. So Like, literally, what's Iraq going to do about it? And then, once you have the setup, Turkey is going to attempt a invasion of and seizure of at least the northern portion of Iraq, because Syria, Iraq, and Jordan region, this like double leg grip right here, is the primary portion of the outside world, outside of Turkey, that was part of the Ottoman Empire for the longest. Like, they did have portions of southeastern Europe, they had portions of the Caucasus, they had chunks of South Africa, and bits of of Arabia at different times for different lengths of time. But the one chunk that like was always Ottoman from the start of the empire to the end, outside of Turkey, was this area right here, the whole Mesopotamia crescent. So that is what they would ultimately go for, and primarily Iraq first because oil, uh, not for their own needs, but just for the like economic leverage and control on the world stage. So that happens likely later 2030s, early 2040s. That then will inevitably bring them into conflict with, at minimum, which would be enough, the US, which that would be enough right there, as is obviously that's where Turkey runs into a lead wall, and their whole imperial ambitions end up coming to an end. Possibly, other members, not even just from like US military allied nations, but just other nations themselves in general, who, are kind of dependent on Persian Gulf oil. So then uh, Turkey loses that, and maybe, hopefully, the Kurdistan portions, the little corner in southeastern Turkey and the little corner in northeastern Syria, actually then get to like join into an actual Kurdistan, and Kurdistan finally gets to exist after being repeatedly conquered, deleted from the map, having attempted genocide committed on them by like five different governments in the span of 100 years. Finally, they might actually get to exist. Uh, Not again. I'm not saying this will be like officially on the world map, like UN recognized or anything. However, the end result, regardless of like whether it's a recognized thing, will be uh like early slash mid 2040s onward, will be an actual like de facto independent Kurdistan. So that's the whole length and route Turkey is intent on going down. And oh yeah, I forgot. Part of the other reason for the northwestern portion of Iran, other than just having a further stretch to position military forces in, particularly for furthering Iran from them, and also having more position to do the surround on northern Iraq, is also for resources, namely iron. Because you see, the thing is, one of the foundational components of being a superpower, or at least a military power, is the ability for mass industrial self sufficiency, which the US can do. China can kind of do somewhat. However, it has a lot of problems that it can't get around. India could do it. Uh, Europe collectively, as a collective whole, could do it. Brazil, if Brazil actually developed as a nation, could do it. So could Argentina. And Russia slash the Soviet Union, more so when it was the Soviet Union because it had control over more stuff, could do it. However, Russia has tended to lack the competency to do it. And who was there? There were a few others. Who else is it? Indonesia and Australia also can do it. Turkey cannot. Turkey lacks quite a lot of things that it needs others for, primarily petroleum, and even and natural gas and even coal. And they have a lot of minerals and metals themselves, like chromium, nickel, copper, and other things. However, one key thing they kind of lack that's really basic is iron, the foundational component of steel. Now, obviously, at the moment, they import iron because they're still part of the global market because they haven't started the whole mega necro empire restoration thing. But when they start to get squeezed out, they will, after the war with Iran, have access to slash control over the Azeri portion of Iran, where there is a decent enough amount of iron and there are active iron mines. So they will have that. And part secretly of the reason that they are actually eagerly helping Ukraine in the war is, for one, obviously they want Russia to fall, just like their other supposed ally China does, because that then just leaves Turkey more powerful. That inherently leaves anyone who is on the world power stage more powerful if one of the former world powers, who in Russia's case turns out they were never actually as powerful as they were believed to be, but it leaves anyone on the world power stage more inherently more powerful if one of the world powers, one of the other ones, falls off the stage. So they were eager to help Ukraine so that Russia fails and inevitably implodes, and that will leave Ukraine, who was formerly an iron miner. However, that region is temporarily still occupied by Russia until the upcoming counteroffensive, which is the second portion of the stream we're about to get to. And Russia also has iron mines in the same region because they share the same deposit. So Turkey primarily bought from them and also just directly bought steel as well. However, they have been upping their steel production and actually making the steel themselves. But in terms of iron, they primarily got from Ukraine and Russia, and them helping Ukraine, apart from being for the sake of knocking out Russia, gets them like heavy friendship points and like sort of a you owe me that they believe they'll be able to call in the future for like guaranteed iron and other industrial shipments, and also from a like post collapse economically desperate Russia, they'll easily be able to buy that. So that's kind of part of their reason for like the support of Ukraine against Russia, is because they're hoping that Ukraine will feel that they're left with an IOU. And also, even if Ukraine, as it probably will, goes along with the broader US NATO way when stuff inevitably turns against Turkey, they will still have an economically desperate Russia that will sell them iron. And also, they will have, their own control over this portion here. And there are a few other outliers, like I don't know, Mauritania would probably sell them iron because Mauritania doesn't really care about uh, optics or anything, and no one would really honestly stop Mauritania from doing it anyways, because that's Mauritania's only real source of income. I haven't checked chat in like 20 minutes. Event Horizon, you are. I thought you were dead. You were supposed to be dead. For those who are unaware, this thing here is a troll. It is it's a failed troll. He doesn't like half the time he doesn't like really try. He can be good at it when he wants to, but he usually only like puts like 10% of the effort into it. No super chats. All right, looks like I am definitely not crossing the monetary threshold by the end of this month. All right, so that's Turkey's path that they have chosen. And then we have Ukraine, where Russia is facing its end. So, as we can prove, was this? Okay, that's not something from me. That's just Putin was being stupid and cringe. But yeah, oh, yeah, I forgot. Here, this is my boy Alexei. We don't actually know each other, but he is a Russian. I think he just turned 20. He was formerly a edgy Russian teenager. Now he's an edgy Russian college student. He does not care, like at all, about the regime threats for saying the kind of anti-regime stuff that he does. And I'm not sure how many times, but he has been arrested and beaten multiple times, I believe. And yes, it literally over saying stuff on Twitter because that's what happens to you in Russia now. But he was quoting here some of some I one of Russia's like more propaganda mouthpiecey politicians who was actually saying something along the lines of like I think it's time we realize that we we're not the country we were told we were. And so I was like, oh, having a moment of actual realization, are we? But yeah, just proof and evidence that again, I've been saying this for a while. Oh, and mocking the Chinese military, of course, like I occasionally do, for the only time they've actually faced combat in recent history, which was in Sudan against dudes with AKs, while the Chinese troops, had, body armor, modern gear, infantry fighting vehicles, assault vehicles, and everything. And when they were literally attacked by dudes in pickup trucks with AKs, they fled and abandoned the post. So that is China's military. Like the biggest thing that Russia and China have in propaganda against the US is like usually saying stuff like, but the US military lets gay people join. And like I mean, you how is that supposed to face against this though? Like we let gay people in the military. However, the thing is our gay people don't flee from combat when they get into it. That kind of should tell you something. Like all the Chinese like military recruitment videos where they show like a bunch of like quote unquote manly looking Chinese dudes like all screaming at the camera and doing one-handed push-ups. The funny thing is when they get into actual combat against a weak force that they could easily overpower with almost no risk to themselves, they literally run away from combat. So yes, this is actually what Taiwan is facing. And then I'm commenting on stuff about well, what we get into now. Actually, that is the what are you doing? Stop doing this stuff to me. So the counteroffensive is about to start, and I again since last year have been saying most likely the big final cascade in which the Russian front collapses will start either around the very end of May or the very start of June. And that has been pushed off only once, and that is very recently. And that's because of just a recent batch of rain. It's been off and on raining in here. Like, look at Zaporizhia. It's been raining for the last several days in Ukraine, at least that area of Ukraine. But tomorrow is about the last day of it, and then it resumes being mostly sunny, which is what the summer in Ukraine is like. So that was like the only cause for me to like ever push it out, and thus that has me like push it forward to like probably another week out. Which based on how they've done things looks like that's how it's going to be. So after the rain stops, I would say the earliest would probably be on like the weekend or the end of the weekend, but you'd probably still count a few more days out after that, like just to make sure the mud re-dries good enough. So it's happening within roughly the time frame that I called it for, and the view that it's eminent, kind of is the fact that after having like off and on really minor strikes over the course of the winter and early spring, now over the last 3 weeks, Ukraine has dialed up the HIMARS level to 11, and they have been hitting and slamming absolutely everything in existence. Most recently, they hit Russia's uh, Russia's like Donetsk command center in Mariupol and completely dropped the thing. Uh, Dead about 100, seriously wounded about 400, and that's not Ukraine's claim. That was actually the Russian military's admission of the aftermath of that strike. And more importantly, the actual goal was that they managed to kill two colonels in that strike. Which, if anyone's not familiar with military ranks, it's for commanding officers. It's hold on, let me shut off my stupid phone again. It's second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, major, lieutenant colonel, colonel. Colonel is the highest ranking in terms of like on ground combat. Colonel's like the highest ranking, I guess you could say, field officer who's like actually going to be there and actually like in real time coordinating and commanding things. So they are doing both strategic strikes because they have hit several clusters of Russian tanks because Russians are being as stupid as ever. And literally in one of the ones near Melitopol, I believe it might have been Tokmak though. They literally brought in like 9 tanks, their better ones, like T90s, and they parked them like just all right up next to each other. And we, gave Ukraine the satellite imagery of that, and they're like, "Oh, well, I mean, if they're just handing it to us, then sure." And so they've been doing those one after another. Ammunition accumulation points, fuel storage areas, the command center in Mariupol, where they managed to get two colonels at once, and they got another one. I don't know if it was in Berdyansk, but I think it was in the port of Berdyansk. And also now, uh, the stuff out of HIMARS range isn't even out of HIMARS range because the UK gave them Storm Shadow cruise missiles, and they have been having some fun with those. And they have even struck the Saki airfield in Crimea, which is where Russia has had to keep its combat aircraft and like attack helicopters now, since Ukraine has been able to hit most of them in the airfields that are actually in the land bridge portion that Russia is still holding on to. And so now that they have stuff with longer range than HIMARS in the form of Storm Shadow cruise missiles, they have actually been striking at the airfields in Crimea and have been knocking out uh, Russia's primarily their ground support aircraft that would, the ones that would be called in to, try to do like gunning runs on advancing Ukrainian forces once they start puncturing the front lines. And also, hilariously, right after Russia finally seized Bakhmut after sacrificing 30,000 lives for it and declared it, a great victory. Ukraine sent because there are about 12 to 1400 Russians who defected from the Russian armed forces and have been fighting against Russia for Ukraine. They sent a armored column of those Russian volunteers to just as like a show of force thing to breach the Russian border. And lo and behold, the Russian border with Ukraine, the country they are currently invading and at war with, has no defense along it whatsoever. The defense was 6 border guards with handguns, with sidearms in a border checkpoint. That's the Russian border defense. They pushed right through that border And there's even if you don't really pay attention to the news or Twitter or anything, there's still no way you missed that. They pushed right through and just started rolling towards Belgorod until uh, Ukraine actually told them to stop and not go that deep. So they stopped and kind of just like sat around and waited because the actual goal of that, other than just showing uh, basically the Russian population how inept Russia itself is, they then have the secondary goal, which they succeeded at, of Russia going into a panic and redirecting a whole bunch of force from within the occupied areas of Ukraine and or from nearby bases within Russia, force that would have otherwise been used to, back up and try to hold off an offensive in Ukraine, were then shuffled into the Belgorod region to then try to, set up and pretend to their own civilian populace that they actually have a border defense. And ever since then, Ukraine has been launching cross border artillery strikes on those forces and equipment because, lo and behold, a lot of it's around the Shebekino. Lo and behold, Russia continues to be dumb. And when they drove in, like those forces, they just parked all of those tanks and armored vehicles right next to each other in a parking lot. So Ukraine just started launching artillery barrages and has been blowing the stuff up. And do you know what happened after the first time? Russia brought in another group and put them all together in another parking lot just a few blocks away. And so they got hit again. And also, as you may have heard about, the whole massive Moscow drone swarm party this morning or yesterday morning, whichever one it was, Ukraine has been launching quite a lot of long range drones on not an actual like mission to really target or destroy anything, because the ones that don't get shot down by air defense, and only about a third of them got shot down, Ukraine just then crashes them into the woods. So they're not like being actually sent to do anything. They're just another panic measure, which has worked because it's getting Russia to redeploy a whole bunch of air defense systems in and around Moscow and a lot of other areas where Ukraine has sent random drone swarms that, again, aren't really doing anything. But that's not their point. They're not supposed to do anything other than cause panic. And so now uh, Russians have been posting on their own social media accounts footage as they, drive by on the highway of, S-300 air defense systems suddenly being put up in random parking lots around the outskirts of the city, which is, again, was the point. It's making them sink air defense assets into internal defense as opposed to having them deployable in the field. And the ones that are in the field have been getting hammered by harm missiles, which we have been just shipping off to Ukraine by the baker's dozen. And they have destroyed quite a number of air defense points along this ridge here, which is right behind where the front line is, where the line of control is, so that basically their air force, the Ukrainian air force that Russia has claimed 7 separate times to have completely destroyed, but somehow miraculously still exists, so that their air force will, the non-existent one, will be able to come in and actually do assistant ground strikes once everything starts. And so everything is going, and also Russia is being really dumb on their own in some regards. Like they don't. Uh, there's no Ukraine has no amphibious capability, but for some reason, Russia has like been digging a whole bunch of trenches and setting up like a whole bunch of those iron girder anti-landing beach defense like infrastructure along the beaches of Crimea. Like they, for some reason, they seem convinced that Ukraine is going to D-Day Crimea, but like Ukraine doesn't have amphibious landing capabilities. They barely even have like more than a few boats. What they do have is submersible or semi-submersible kamikaze drones or ocean-going drones that they have repeatedly struck ships with. And most importantly, recently they struck one of the some of the refueling infrastructure for Russian warships in the Sevastopol port. But so the massive hammering has been ongoing with HIMARS and Storm Shadow stuff and HARM missiles, and the panic-inducing stuff with the whole Belgorod invasion and the Moscow drone party. So that has been going on for several weeks now, which is you know, kind of what happened before the Kharkiv reclamation and the Kherson push out. So it's the like preemptive hammering is underway when the actual like grand ground offensive push comes. That is, I would say, at minimum still like 5 days away. The soonest I would see it now, because of having to postpone things because of a week of rain that they just received unexpectedly. That would be like the soonest point would be like this weekend, but it will still probably be at least a few days after that, like into next week. I will be surprised if it's like later than the weekend following next week. But I would also be surprised if it happens like sooner than this coming weekend, though, because they're going to do at least a few more days of ground pounding before stuff actually starts rolling. Check chat. Whoa, you guys got active. Oh no, never mind. That was just him. Okay. Apparently, I guess Event Horizon is about to invade China, and I mean, man, you might be able to succeed at that, because I mean, like I said, the only combat performance we have from their military was them fleeing from like really basic generic AK wielders in Sudan. So I mean, come on, like even other basic AK wielders don't flee from basic AK wielders. You got to be like really low on the morale lens to run away in that instance, especially like I said, when you're sitting in like the Chinese equivalent of like a striker AFV, or some kind of giant MRAP with a literal remote controlled autocannon on top of it, but you still run away from a bunch of dudes with AKs riding in pickup trucks. What? Uh, in what regard? Regarding Kosovo and Serbia, like what? Like, if, are you asking what will happen if Serbia actually tries to invade Kosovo? The answer is they would get annihilated immediately. Like this isn't even a like us intervening situation like 30 years ago. This is a we're literally actually there ourselves situation. There's I forgot the exact size of force, but there's a decent contingent from us there, along with several other NATO members. I think the biggest portion is some Italian airborne guys, several hundred of those, and the accompanying uh, you know the accompanying cavalry. Cavalry in the modern day, again, meaning a few tanks and a bunch of infantry or armored fighting vehicles like strikers and stuff. We also, as far as I'm aware, we also actually have some of our some of our attack helicopters stationed there. I'm not sure whether Apaches or Vipers, but we have several there. Along with, we also have a group of special forces there with some of the stealth Blackhawks. And even apart from that, uh, we would then immediately, send a response force in. So if Serbia actually does that, then they're just going to experience annihilation, 2.0 from their perspective. So if I had to guess on their part, it's probably just a support ratcheting scheme to drum up like fervor to for like support for the regime internally. But there is also, the fact that basically everyone has started going insane as of late. Like Russia's going necro imperialism, China's going necro imperialism, Turkey wants to go necro imperialism, and I'm using the term necro imperialism in for one a Russian dude I listen to a lot uh, because despite the claims from all of my mostly now former Russian viewers of me being Russophobic, no, actually, I speak with quite a number of Russian people all the time. Have done so for years. One of the Russian dudes I listen to most frequently invented the term necro imperialism for his referring to Putin's dreams and ambitions. And all three examples are necro imperialism because they're explicitly trying, they're not like new, they're not like a country that hasn't done stuff before. They're all trying to revive a dead empire. And I unironically all are kind of going to fail at it because when an empire dies, it's kind of for a reason, and they don't really tend to come back all that well. Uh, Serbia, so I don't know, maybe the dude will actually lose his mind and try for it, but he has been smarter than I would have initially given him credit for. The guy who's in charge of Serbia, I don't know, Vucevic, Vucevic or whatever, uh, because it turns out, although he denied it, he has actually, a few months in, once it became kind of obvious how things were going to go, he actually kind of turned on Russia and has been covertly uh, giving Ukraine arms and munitions, like a lot of ammunition for their older Soviet rocket artillery. Not directly. Instead, he did it as a sale, legally on the market. Anyone could buy it. He sold it to middleman countries like Croatia or Albania or Bulgaria, who then just flat out gave it to Ukraine. But he knew exactly where it was going to be ending up. Uh, just like how uh, even if Lula tries to still pretend like he's Putin's friend, uh, you know, he still is kind of trolling him because Brazilian vehicles and stuff have been showing up in Ukraine, and Lula's response was kind of just to like shrug and lift his arms a bit, in an I don't know how that happens gesture. So even everyone who was like kind of previously Putin's friend or ally is basically just trolling him now. Putin is like entirely surrounded by event horizons. New stuff. Darn. No super chats. Nope. I'm not getting paid. South Africa. Did you see the video I did most recently? Because that's about like the extent of the updates on their part. The power the power industry situation continues degrading. They're at 13 hours a day without power now for whichever chunks of the country get rotated on and off the schedule. And the uh, part of that I've told you guys already in the past is part of that is because of people actually like just raiding power substations, switching it off, and stealing all the copper to sell because, South Africa has a 32% unemployment rate, a third of the entire country. So, people are resorting to whatever they can to get money. And now also their economy is going to get hit even harder because they've started stealing stuff from the railways. Just outside of one of their most major cargo ports, Durban, people have been going up to the railway junctions where like the tracks will switch direction. They've been stealing. They've been stealing like the motors that turn the stuff to rip the copper and magnets out of them. They've been stealing. They've been stealing the computer systems that actually control the switching. They've been stealing the monitoring cameras because the cameras, have a bunch of computer stuff and precious metals in them, and that has like cut down the amount of freight that's been able to come in and out of Durban by like over half. So now they're facing yet another angle of economic stagnation and drawdown. And with the finalized GDP numbers from most countries coming out recently, we found out that South Africa, while initially claiming that they still managed to grow by 2% economically in 2022, despite all of the power outages, it turns out they were dead wrong, as anyone could have guessed, and they actually lost 5% GDP over the course of 2022. And so now the numbers of this year, so far in terms of power outages and now all the railway damage, this has been this is going to be an even worse year. So at minimum, their economy is going to contract by at minimum another 5% over the course of this year. And I have no like timetable I could really give of like when, again, if they don't turn things around, when a complete and absolute nationwide grid collapse, grid failure would happen. But within the next like couple of years is likely if they don't like manage to fix things enough soon enough, which they don't really seem to be intending to. At least, I mean, they haven't really given any indicators of it other than throwing $4 billion at the problem recently, which, did fix the problem kind of. Like they got the blackouts down to only 10 hours a day, like I said, for a few weeks before things started deteriorating again. And now the blackouts are up to 13 hours a day. Anybody? Nothing. Short term loss for long term loss. All right. Let's see. Were there other things I was thinking? Oh yeah, I promised I would start listing off to you guys things that are still immensely dependent or entirely dependent on China for manufacturing. So things that you might want to start gathering up now ahead of time. Again, again, I'd say it's still very unlikely that they go for it this year. Next year, though, the probability tips over 50%. So next year is the first year where I start saying like, all right, this is probably going to be it. And as of now, I would say 2025 itself is probably going to be the absolute most likely year for it. But this year, still not very likely. I would say 20% chance of it, maybe 25%, but probably still only about 20% chance of it. And again, whatever year it happens, it's going to be in the fall because that's when the waters between China and Taiwan are the calmest. So the all their vessels going across the strait would have the least amount of time in transit. The it only have 6 hours of being rained down upon with guided cruise missiles instead of 10 hours of it. However, ultimately that doesn't matter because they're guided cruise missiles. They're just going to hit you. and you can you can bolt down and weld as many SAM systems to the upper decks of your civilian ferries as you want, but it's not really going to work out. But when it happens, stuff from Taiwan and stuff from China, both for different reasons, obviously, is going to be at least briefly cut off, or at least in very short supply. So stuff on Taiwan's end, something you might not initially think of, water filters for refrigerators. If you have a fridge that has, like, the water dispenser thing that you can refill water bottles on, a lot of those water filters are made in Taiwan. So you might want to, each one usually lasts about 6 months. So you might want to have at least a few of those on hand at any given time, for when you get cut off. And obviously, there's the whole processor and semiconductor issue. However, again, it is now, as of the end of last year, start of this year, down to only 60 to 65% of all processors are made in Taiwan, as opposed to back in like 2012, it was 90%. And by the end of this year, it should be down into the upper 50s in percentile. And if China waits until 2025, then by the second half of 2025, again, the second half being when fall is, which is when the invasion has to be if China's being smart about it, then by 2025, it will actually be down to something like only 50 or 45% of all processors being made in Taiwan. So, uh, computer computerized items like computers themselves, phones, game consoles, everything, you will as of now, you will see like an abrupt cut in their supply by about half. So everything from laptops, phones, computers, game consoles, uh, stupid uh, gizmos or whatever you get today, I don't know, Fitbit watches or whatever that dumb stuff is, you will at least immediately see the stock in their, like, on the shelves in stores will immediately drop by about half. Uh, Plastic non-essentials are almost all exclusively still made in China, namely toys, for example. So that is something I have told you in past streams already. The toy aisles in stores within a week or two of the invasion starting are going to immediately go empty. So that is something you will see. A lot of stuffed animals also, and I think China still manufactures about 20% of the world's clothing, although that is decreasing as time goes on. And I think the only plastic thing that is outside of that that is still completely dependent on China is pet waste bags that you most commonly are associate them with scooping up dog crap outside. But if you own a cat, you also usually use them to scoop the cat stuff out of the litter pan into, and then toss those into a preferably an outside, trash bin, because you don't want the smell staying around inside the house. Basically, all pet waste bags are still made in China. Uh, a huge portion of shower curtains are still made in China, although the companies that make them are shifting the production to Vietnam. Uh, iPhones, you're going to see the supply of those specifically, at least, get cut by double half. So by half from the lack of processors, because half of processors are made in Taiwan, and then another half on top of that, because half of iPhones are still made in China. So if you are an iPhone dependent person, you will specifically for iPhones see the supply of them available drop to a quarter of what you currently see usually available at shops or phone stores or whatever. And then what else do we have? What else do we have? Light bulbs. Quite a lot of light bulbs are made in China, especially if if you don't like paying for like General Electric ones. If you prefer like saving a buck or two by getting the store brand ones, which are they are the same, but the primary difference is that all the store brand stuff is made in China. Uh, a decent bit of like some of the name brand stuff, like General Electric, is also made in China. However, they have been covertly prodded by the U.S. government to start not producing in China because light bulbs are kind of an essential thing. But still, you might want to start collecting a few, sets, just to be ready, depending, on how fast they start moving production out of there. And for uh, several, for tools, a fair amount of tools were made in China previously. The companies that were making a lot in China have started moving their production, though. They have been moving production to Indonesia and over to Mexico. So that risk is starting to go away. Uh, the the one risk in that regard, like majorly, is steel, because a huge chunk of the world's steel is produced in and then exported from China. However, get out of my face. However, that is gradually being assuaged or assuaged, however that word is pronounced, as India has, though not publicly for that reason, but for that reason in, private political talks with the entire rest of the world, India has been really cranking up their steel industry and has gone from over, I think, just the last 5 years, they've gone from producing only like 20 million tons a year up to cranking out 70 million tons a year. So, India specifically, at least, is doing the big, Atlas shoulder burden portion of that switch for everybody. So a lot of things made out of steel will also have some issues with supply. However, not as much as it otherwise would have been, and not for too long, because by the end of the 2020s, at least, India will not be at China's steel production level, but will be close enough. Because also remember, a huge, well, not a huge portion as in like the majority, but a decent enough chunk of the steel China makes is also steel that China itself is consuming, because China builds a lot of stuff, especially, entire cities that no one ever lives in, because that's part of the whole government real estate Ponzi scheme that they're constantly doing, which is part of how they keep their GDP pumping up as high as it is. What else? What else is there? In the U.S. specifically, the steel supply will be mostly fine, because the U.S. After again covert, basically warnings about this coming, covert prodding of the U.S. steel companies, were which were making a lot in China and then importing it and selling it in the U.S. Although they still, even before this, did make a lot in the U.S. still. After some covert prodding from Washington, they have started refiring a lot of steel production in the U.S. And we're back up to, I think, like 60 to 80 million tons a year, which is enough for our production of stuff. But a lot of other places are still heavily dependent on China, like Africa and Latin America, and a lot of Southeast Asia, and Europe as well. However, thankfully, they can and have just started to simply switch back on all the steel production in Eastern Europe, because during the 90s and early 2000s, after the whole Soviet bloc collapse, when Eastern Europe was desperately poor, steel production there was extremely cheap, like it still is in China and India at the moment. So that's where Europe was getting a lot of its steel from. However, then as the Eastern European countries rose up towards first world level, then steel production followed, the cheapest labor cost or cheapest operating cost, which then shifted to China and now India. So a lot of those steel plants were dialed down, But the point is, they're still there. They still exist and are still making steel. They just haven't been making anywhere as much as they used to. Like Poland especially used to make like a whole lot. I forget what exactly their count was up to, but they got down to only like I think 10 million tons a year, and now over the last couple of years they've gone back up towards 20, and I think they have the capacity to get up towards like 40 or 50 is what all their plants together are capable of. So like Europe will be able to get Eastern Europe to fire all their stuff back up. So that will be easier. It will be easier for Europe because again, all those plants still exist and have still been operating. They've just been operating at reduced capacity. However, for the Middle East, Africa, a lot of Latin America, and a lot of Southeast Asia, it's going to be harder because a lot of that demand is being thrown over onto India. And although India is building it up fast, India increasing its capacity has to come from them building more steel mills into existence from nothing, which again, they are doing rather quickly, rather impressively, but that is still going to take a bit. And what else was there? There were a few. There were a few other things, I think. Actually, I have the list. No, wait, I don't have the list. All right, I can't exactly recall them off the top of my head. Uh, do you mean like them going? Do you mean them going for those small islands this year? Uh, there would be a higher chance of that. I still think they wouldn't even try that this year, though. But they could. There, there's a there is a decent enough chance of them going for those, like just as a initial test to see how their military performs in mass armed combat. However, there is still the likelihood that they want to keep as much surprise as possible, even though it's not going to be a surprise to anyone. But they they still want to as much of a surprise as it won't be, but kind of will like 1% be that they still probably want to keep as much surprise about the whole thing as possible. So I don't actually think they would do anything like preemptive that would kind of like deadlock the absolute reality that they're going to invade Taiwan into the public space on the global stage. Emil Emil is on I think Emil's on the Patreon map or not. Oh no, Emil's usually a super chatter, I think. Oh, we did just get a new $10 patron, maybe. I have to wait a few days to see if his charge actually goes through or not. But someone named Amon actually did just sign up as a $10 patron, and since Alejandro already got Saudi Arabia, because $10 patrons get labeled as Persian Gulf producers. Alejandro already got Saudi Arabia because he was the first one. So the next largest producer is obviously Iraq. So Oman will get Iraq if the charge goes through. And I thought Emil was actually on the Patreon list, but I think it was just a super chatter. What was I going? Oh yeah, I was going to X that off. That's what I was going to do. Oh, okay. Well, And anytime I see someone with just like a regular name, I usually just assume that's their regular name because otherwise, if people don't use their regular names, they usually use some fake nonsense like Max Ogier or Event Horizon. And Josh is on the Patreon map. Josh got labeled as Kazakhstan. All right, I think otherwise that's going to be it then, unless there was anything else from anybody. There was nothing else on my list, and no chat revenue. All right, we are not getting paid this month, not by YouTube at least. I will get paid by Patreon, but not getting paid by YouTube. We'll come up just short of the threshold. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like I'm forgetting something. Yeah, I definitely am forgetting something, but I can't remember what it was. So that's not exactly like I'd be able to get into it since I can't remember whatever it was. All right, did anybody have anything else other than Josh's dab? All right, I'll wait the 15-second lag delay. If there's nothing else, then that'll be it. All right, that should be it then. Thank you for everybody who showed up, and I'll see you in the next video, which should be, well, I have no idea when I'm actually going to do it, but a few days from now, sort of. But that's it.